I'm James Goldrup, and this is The Evolution of Weapons Throughout Sci-Fi by David Rivero, me, Ethan Fernandez, and Gabriel Benitez. Note, the dates specified are not set in stone. There will still be influence from old discoveries in the modern day. The dates listed are only when they were most prominent and or the introduction of the idea. The early ages of sci-fi. In the early days of sci-fi, around the early 1800s, weapons were usually scaled-up versions of the ones used during the period of the rendition. For example, a pretty common thing was just pretty big bows that usually shot similar arrows to what they had at the time. They were just scaled up so they would cause a bit more destruction. There wasn't much scientific advancements to influence the portrayal of weapons. In the mid-1800s, weaponized energy. During the middle 1800s, the discovery of electromagnetic waves, more specifically X-rays, and radioactive decay influenced many writers to incorporate those discoveries into their depictions of weapons. For example, in H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, he wrote about the heat ray, which was a weapon that was able to fire off X-rays that would cause heat. Nikola Tesla's genius did not go unnoticed by the sci-fi writers either. Many early renditions of ray guns use lightning or electrical arcs similar to those of Nikola Tesla's Tesla coils. 1900s through the 1940s, the atomic age. With the reintroduction and acceptance of the atom, scientists theorized of utilizing the atom for releasing mass amounts of energy. The taming of this energy could be used for weapons, like Edmund Hamilton, the atom gun, which reduced things to the size of an atom, and H.G. Wells' atomic bomb. Although H.G. Wells wasn't what we would now consider an atomic bomb, it did use the idea of splitting an atom to release massive amounts of energy, but it was only a grenade type of weapon, not really the ones we know now. And the manipulation of atoms is also mentioned in Clifford Simak's atomic pistol, which also reduced things to the size of an atom. Here are the covers of the aforementioned books. 1910s. The invention of the Zeppelin went mostly unnoticed by the sci-fi writers because it was the limiting factor in how they could portray it. The one of the very few portrayals of a Zeppelin was H.G. Wells' The War in the Air. It's a war about in the air, of course, that starts out between the United States and Japan due to American citizenship for Japanese immigrants being denied by the U.S. Japan turns out to have a very strong air force made up of almost only Zeppelins. The 1950s to 60s, the War on the Mind. With the exposing of the U.S. government program codenamed MK Ultra, there was a massive scare of sleeper agents and mind control programs. MK Ultra was a project that attempted the creation of a drug capable of mind controlling people. 1950s sci-fi boom. Due to advancements in technology like nuclear energy and space exploration, backed by the end of World War II, science fiction began a booming period. People were now interested in ideas like space and dystopias. This caused many authors and screenplay writers to bring brand new ideas. 1960s to 70s, the new wave. The invention of the laser in the 60s quickly drew the attention of authors, filmmakers, and other influencers of sci-fi. The laser quickly made its impact in films and novels around the 60s and 70s, and would be author and film writers' main choice of weaponry in their stories. One of, or if not the most popular series of sci-fi, Star Wars, would commonly use laser weapons. The Jedi and Sith use laser swords called lightsabers, and the enemy soldiers even have laser rifles. More examples of laser weaponry would be The Neutron Star by Larry Niven, which featured the laser cannon. Another film that would feature laser weapons was Lost in Space by Irwin Allen. The 80s through 90s, cyberpunk. During this time, computers were getting more accessible by the public, and fast progress was being made towards making these computers faster and even stronger. People were beginning to imagine computer-based weapons, thus starting the cyberpunk era. Regular futuristic weapons were still used in cyberpunk, but the major change in this era was the addition of computer-based weapons. The living weapon. As technology has progressed, people have always feared the idea of sentient weapons taking over the world. Authors have used this concept to make robotic sentient weapons. Even before this time, the concept was of the creation of a sentient killing machine was brought to life by Mary Shelley in her book Frankenstein in 1818. In today's world, we mainly see sentient weapons like the robot in the robot-like form, like the T-800 from Terminator, or even the later T-10,000 in Terminator 2. The current state of weapons in sci-fi. Old concepts of weapons are used due to a lack of new advancements and technologies in the real world. Even though the same old weapon ideas are being used, authors still try to make their own unique takes on these same weapons. And there is a more radical shift away from sci-fi literature and more towards sci-fi films and even heavy appearances in video games, with many series that take place in the very far future with very sci-fi-like weaponry. Some examples of sci-fi weapons that utilize old concepts would be the Spartan laser from Halo 3, which used lasers that were introduced in the 60s and 70s. And in Doom Eternal, the BFG is a powerful plasma gun that has some influence even from the mid-1800s. Parallels between sci-fi weapons and real-world ones. It has been the typical habit of writers and filmmakers throughout the numerous eras of sci-fi to base their weapons in their literature and films on weaponry that existed in the present time or from the past, while adding their own unique twists and abilities to their invention. An example would be the lightsaber and the sword. The lightsaber itself is obvious inspiration from a sword. They have similar structure and are both typically used for cutting. Main difference comes from the fact that lightsaber's blade is a laser, and it can retract back into its handle, while real life's blade is made out of metal and is static. Reflection. These weapons have evolved alongside the genre itself. These weapons can range from plausible to create one day and basically impossible. Most of these weapons draw parallels to real-life weapons, concepts, and invention. They can even have ties to events on what's going on during this time period. Even inventions can influence these sci-fi weapons. These futuristic weapons make appearances in almost every medium, ranging from books, to TVs, to TV series, to even board games like Warhammer 40k.